Hi chess fans, in this video we will look at the game between Giri with white and Liren Ding with black. And the game was played in Wenzhou in a one-on-one match between Anish and Liren. Anish started with e4, and after e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, knight f6. Castle, we have reached the open Spanish, and after bishop e7, d3, b5, bishop b3, black continues with d6. And in this position, white is playing a standard plan, a4. But let's have a look at this move for instructive reasons. Let's learn a little bit about the Spanish opening. What is the idea behind this move, and what should black play? Okay, so basically, one of the ideas is black is threatening to take here, and then the rook is not protected. So for example, after castle, white can simply take, and after takes, white wins the rook. Okay, so that's kind of like the first idea behind this move. So what can black do against this? Black can take here, but then this is probably pretty bad because the bishop again has the Spanish pin here, so black also doesn't want to do that. So what can black do? If the pawn moves forward, so it cannot be attacked, because after all it's protected here by the knight, and we gain some space, and maybe this is good for black. If black does that, white actually has a5, disconnecting the two pieces, and then after, for example, castle, the white knight suddenly has this knight square on c4 and can hop there. And on c4, it's pretty safe because it cannot be attacked by this pawn anymore that has moved forward, and white is controlling this square here, so it can also not be so easily attacked by this pawn. So that's why moving forward is not so good. So what can black do? There's basically two alternatives. One is maybe a little bit more intuitive. Bishop b7 protects the rook both from the bishop and the queen. But in this position here, white is also having a pretty strong plan, because the knight can hop to c3 with the idea of jumping to the square. And if black forces the matter, for example with b4, the knight moves to d5, and here it's pretty strong. So black wants to maybe exchange these knights, but then after bishop d5, black has time to consolidate his pawns here. But because the bishop is here on b7, this knight cannot move, because the bishop would be able to take this bishop here. So it's a little bit like a pin. And after a5, white has the nice plan to continue with bishop e3, and then, for example, castle, push this pawn forward. So the idea is to take here, and then this bishop is really nice here, protected by the queen, and white has a nice position. So that's sort of the idea or the plan that white can have after black plays bishop b7. So the only remaining move is bishop d7, which looks maybe a little bit, so you have to maybe know the theory, but because it doesn't look so intuitive to me at least, but that's actually the best move probably. And it's also the move that is the most played. And the idea is that the knight now threatens to go to d4, attacking the bishop from here, but also opening up this diagonal. And there would be, so for example, if white plays something like this, black could play, or better, even knight a5. Black could attack the bishop and also attack the pawn. So if the bishop moves away, black could win this pawn. Maybe there's better options as well, but that's kind of like the idea a little bit behind bishop d7. So white usually wants to play c3. That takes away the activity from this knight and also opens up the square for the bishop. But the knight can still hop to a5 with the same plan. And if the bishop simply drops back, really cool. Again, it would be good for white actually if this was to occur, because here, thanks to c3, in this position black would actually lose a piece. So, but black, another thing becomes clear after bishop d7 and knight a5, or in combination with knight a5, because the knight also vacates the room for the pawn here. And so after the bishop, which is attacked, moves back, after c5, the position is in perfect equilibrium. Okay, but black has to know a little bit this stuff. Especially black has to know that the best move here is to play bishop to d7. And that's kind of like the idea behind move a4. Okay, let's have a look how the game continued. Both sides play standard plans now. White is doing the d4 push. The queen is moving over here to get a little pressure with this pawn. Bishop g5, chasing the bishop away, moving the bishop to e6, knight bd2, h3. All of these are pretty standard moves. Attacking the bishop, and the knight jumps in here, which is the moment where the bishop is happy to exchange itself. And now d5, gaining some space, bishop d7, rook e1 developing, bishop f6 developing. And now Giri does a very nice decision that is very interesting and instructive. What can white play in this position? This pawn here, so some discussion can be, is this pawn strong or weak? Some discussion can be, how can black activate his bishop pair here? White can maybe take here and then activate the rook this way. So there's like a number of plans. But with the last moves, rook to e1 and d5, white was preparing something else. White played e5. And what's the idea behind this move? The idea is that black can now win a pawn. Bishop takes, knight takes, pawn takes. And white has given up a pawn in exchange for two things. First, black does not have the bishop pair anymore. And second, white has gained this passed pawn here. So very interesting. In this position, white made the choice, one of the top grandmasters in the world, made the choice to give up a pawn in exchange for the bishop pair and this passed pawn to get some play. Very interesting and instructive. Okay, and after rook e8, white just did standard moves in the position, so exchanging this pawn with the idea of activating this rook a little bit more, and then on d6, the pawn can actually not so easily be attacked by the bishop and also not by the other piece. It takes some time. After knight c6, white is actually happy to exchange pieces. So first white is happy to exchange the rook. Then the bishop moves in, pinning the knight against the queen, and then exchanging itself against the knight. Black is also happy to exchange pieces. And now the pawn moves forward. This is the moment of truth. So white is a pawn down, and now black has to make a choice. Do I hold on to my extra pawn, or do I have to make sure that the passed pawn doesn't queen? So the rook has to move in front of the pawn, and now white could simply win and does win back the pawn. So material is equal, and the position has transformed into a position where white has this advanced passed pawn. And is this enough to win? Probably not, and the reason is that the king here can move forward and win the pawn. So this whole operation in the end didn't yield white a win. And so either white wanted to have an easy draw when he decided in this position here to start exchanging all the pieces, or white really thought he would get an advantage with this, and probably white wanted to exchange pieces so that black cannot gang up on this pawn. This is probably why white wanted to exchange all the pieces, because in this position here, white, because there's not so many black pieces around, can win back the pawn. Okay, and now in this ending, the black plan is to bring the king close and to win back the pawn, and then the ending should be drawn. So the bishop is attacked and moves back. And now we can maybe learn a little bit about these endings. So white is already anticipating that the king will come close and moving the rook in to activate the rook. Maybe once he gives up this pawn to win this pawn and then have an extra pawn this way. King moves in, f3, preparing, white is also preparing to bring in the king. King e7, and now rook b7 attacking the pawn. And white is playing g5, and black is playing g5, and white is deciding to attack this pawn. And this is an interesting maneuver. So in this position, black could have played f3, and if the knight moves away, well, in this position, white could actually not have played f3 because the knight gives a check and then wins this pawn. So very interesting maneuver here. G5, and the idea is that after rook takes, black now has f6, and this check, the king can just take the pawn because g5 has protected the f4 pawn. And on the other hand, if the rook, the rook takes this pawn, the knight is a little bit out of the game here. So the knight is caged in a little bit. And by how the game continued after g5, white decided to take the pawn here. And now f6, moving the king up, and the rook is now not really caged in because he is having a purpose here and can be activated. But g5 is a little trap if white takes this pawn, that this knight can then be trapped in. Okay, just a little nuance. The game is very drawn, but it's just interesting to see how grandmasters play a position like this. Here to play and activate the rook, and then bringing the king in, and then playing g5 to maybe do a little trap. White doesn't fall for it. And then in this position here, black plays king to d6, clearly saying I have no hurry to win back this piece. And white plays h4. Now black goes ahead and takes the pawn. Okay, and in this position here, white could have taken this rook. And what do you think of this ending? Who's better in this ending? Would you rather take black or white? So it looks like black, Ding Liren, was very happy to exchange rooks here. He's offering to exchange rooks, and Giri played rook to h8. So seemingly, Giri did not want to play this opening so much with white. Maybe he wanted to keep a few pieces on the board to continue playing, maybe for a win. But it seems like he wanted to avoid this ending. And that's why I've analyzed this position a little bit and just wanted to highlight, okay, imagine you're white. Probably you don't like this ending so much because black has the bishop, which is maybe a little bit better than the knight because it can play on both sides of the board. And particularly in this position, the bishop can maybe infiltrate white's position, and these pawns here are fixed on the white squares, which is the color of the bishop. So maybe that's why black has a little bit more of a comfortable play, but I just wanted to highlight what is the drawing plan for white, because white can still draw this position quite easily. And the idea is basically first to exchange pawns. So in this position, white can play h takes, and after f takes, king f2, with the idea to exchange pawns here. King e6, g3, f takes, king d5, king g4, again, just eating the pawns, attacking the knight moves back, and now white wins this pawn and black wins this pawn, and so white has reached the goal to exchanging all the pawns. And if you look at this position here, there's nothing much that black can do to prevent white to exchange the pawns. White will simply exchange the pawns and then bring the king, and it's easy to exchange these pawns. Okay, once white has managed to exchange the pawns, the second step is to simply sacrifice this knight against this pawn. That's it, because then black is simply left with the bishop and the king and cannot win anymore, and the game is drawn. So in this position here, white continued knight to f3. Note that the king cannot go down here because of the fork. By the way, what this fork, would it actually work? Yes, because the white king can take the opposition, and then the game is simply drawn. Okay, so the king moves to e4, the knight is attacking the pawn. Pawn moves forward, knight attacks again, pawn moves forward, knight attacks again. Bishop protects the pawn, but the white simply sacrifices itself, and the game is drawn. Okay, so this is the way that I think white would have drawn this ending. Okay, but Giri decided to play on a little bit, not wanting to exchange rooks, attacking the bishop, and I think Giri tries to make the point that the knight and the rook are actually maybe coordinating together quite well. This pawn is protecting the knight here, so the knight has a nice square here. Excuse me, and the rook also has a nice square here. So these pieces are maybe stronger than the bishop and the rook, where at the moment it's unclear how they coordinate. Actually, in this particular ending, it can be argued that this bishop is not coordinating so well with the rook because of these pawns here. So here, it's actually an asset to have the pawns on the bishop's color. So very interesting. In this position here, Giri decided not to go into this ending, but play for little chances, foreseeing that he can fix the pawn, exchange the pawns here, and then, because the king has to move back to get this nice rook here on this file, and this nice square here for the knight. Okay, so it's now up to black to draw this position. And how can black draw this position? Same thing, exchanging pawns. So black played g4, basically forcing white to take the pawn. Take, take. And now black is a pawn down, but he has exchanged some pawns. And he also has the resource that the bishop coordinates with the rook against his pawn. White can protect this rook, but then this rook is now attacking both of the pawns. And this is something that typically the knight and the rook cannot handle so well. So if, for example, the rook was to protect this pawn now, it's hard for white to make progress. For example, after rook d4, if the pawn moves forward, then it's a little bit hard. It's a little bit hard for white to make progress this way as well. The way that the game continued, rook d2, attacking the bishop, and the knight moves in to take over the task of protecting the pawn. But black simply attacks the defender of the pawn, and after this exchange, black is in check, moves out of the check, and now this rook is attacking this pawn, so white is protecting it. But basically this is an elementary drawn ending. You can see here that the black king goes in front of the pawn, so if ever these two pawns are exchanged, which would happen if the white rook somehow tries to infiltrate this position, then the then white would lose this pawn. So basically this is an elementary draw because neither side can make progress, and black was successful in reaching the draw. So a very instructive endgame. So in this position here, the drawing strategy for white, who is slightly worse in this ending, and then in this position here, the drawing strategy for black, who is slightly worse in this ending. And both strategies involved exchanging pawns and simplifying the position. Okay, I hope you learned a little bit about the Spanish opening, the a4, and about this nice idea of pushing the pawn forward, sacrificing a pawn for the exchange of the bishop pair and the passed pawn. And also these two endings, how to draw this ending and how to draw this ending. Excuse me, how to draw this ending. Okay, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.